Hi, boys and girls. This is Mrs. Starrett. I'm reading you another inspiring book for the last week of school. It's a year of change and a year of so many obstacles that you have overcome. And hopefully, you will enjoy this book as you did yesterday's book. This is a little bit different. It's called The Old Woman Who Named Things. Once there was an old woman who loved to name things. She named the old car she drove Betsy. She named the old chair she sat in Fred. And she named the old bed she slept in Roxanne. And the old house Franklin. Every morning she would get out of Roxanne, having a cup of cocoa in Fred, lock up Franklin, and drive to the post office in Betsy. She always hoped for a letter from someone, but all she ever got was bills. The reason the old woman never got any letters was because she had outlived every single one of her friends. This worried her. She didn't like the idea of being a lonely old woman without any friends, without anyone whom she could call by name. So she began to name things, but she named only things that she knew she could never outlive. Her car, Betsy, had more get up and go than anything around her. Her chair, Fred, had never sagged a day in his life. Not one creak or moan had she ever heard out of her old bed, Roxanne. And her house, Franklin, had been standing straight for over 100 years and still didn't look a day past 20. The old woman never worried about outliving any of them, and her days were happy. One day, the old woman was out soaping some mud off Betsy, telling her that Franklin wouldn't want to be seen with a car that didn't keep its bumpers a little cleaner. A shy brown puppy came to the old woman's gate. The old woman had not named the gate because two of its hinges had rusted off, and she could tell that the gate wasn't long for this world. The shy puppy wagged its tail. It looked a little hungry. The old woman stood beside Betsy and watched the puppy for a while. She said. Then she walked into Franklin and got a chunk of ham from her refrigerator and came back outside. The old woman gave the ham to the hungry puppy and told it to go home. She told it that Betsy always made puppies sick, and Fred never allowed puppies to sit on him, and Roxanne wasn't wide enough for a puppy and an old woman to fit on. And besides all this, Franklin couldn't tolerate dog hair, so the puppy went away. But the next day, the puppy was back. The old puppy was sitting in Fred reading a book on the everlasting flowers where she saw the puppy through her window. "Go home," she called to the puppy. The puppy wagged its tail when he saw her. "Go home," she called again. But the puppy just kept wagging. The old woman noticed that it still looked a little hungry. So she went to her refrigerator. She gave the puppy a hunk of cheese and 2 biscuits. Then she told it to go home. The puppy went away. That night, the old woman plumped up her pillow on Roxanne, and she thought about the puppy. It was a very nice puppy, she thought. It was a very pretty puppy, she thought. But it couldn't stay. If it stayed, she would have to give it a name, and it could never last as long as Franklin or Fred or Betsy or Roxanne. She might outlive it, and she didn't want to risk that. She didn't want to outlive any more friends. She would just keep telling it to go home. Every day the shy brown puppy came to the old woman's gate. Every day she fed it and told it to go home. Away it went, and it always came back. This went on for many months. The puppy got bigger and bigger until soon it wasn't a puppy anymore. It was a dog, and it was still a dog with no name. And all this time, the old woman had gotten a new dresser that she had named Bill, a new wheelbarrow that she had named Francine, and a new concrete pig for her garden that she named Bud. But the dog she faithfully fed at her gate every day still had no name. Since it had no name, the old woman didn't have to worry about outliving it. She thought herself pretty clever. Then one day the shy brown dog did not come to the old woman's house. She sat and fed and watched the gate all day long. But the dog never came, and the old woman felt sad. The next day the dog did not come. The old woman drove Betsy around town looking for the dog, but she did not find it. The old woman felt even sadder. The following day, when still the dog did not come, the old woman knew that she had to do something. She picked up the telephone and called the dog catcher. "Have you caught any shy brown dogs?" the old woman asked the dog catcher. "We've got a whole kennel full of shy brown dogs, ma'am," said the dog catcher. "Was yours wearing a collar with a name on it?" "No," said the old woman sadly, and she hung up the telephone. The old woman sat and thought about the shy brown dog who had no collar with a name. Whoever it was, no one would know that it was supposed to come to the old woman's gate every day, and that it was supposed to be fed and tell it to go home every day, and that things were always supposed to be that way. The shy brown dog had no collar and no name, and no one would ever be able to know these things about it. The old woman made a decision. She locked up Franklin and drove Betsy to the dog catcher's kennel. She said to the dog catcher, "I've come to find my dog." He asked her what color it was. It was brown, she said. He asked her how old it was, and she said about a year. And then he asked her what the name was. The old woman thought a moment. She thought of an old dear friend whom she outlived. She saw her smiling faces and remembered their lovely names, and she thought how lucky she had been to have known these friends. She thought what a lucky old woman she was. "My dog's name is Lucky," she told the dog catcher. He led her to a big yard full of white dogs and black dogs and brown dogs. The old woman looked and looked, and finally she saw only one shy dog sitting beside the gate. The dog was looking at Betsy parked in the driveway. The old woman called out, "Here, Lucky!" And the sound of her voice, the shy dog came running. From that day on, Lucky lived with the old woman and always came when he heard his name. It turned out Betsy didn't make all dogs sick, and Fred was happy to allow a dog to sit on him, and Franklin really didn't mind a little dog hair. So you're probably thinking why I read this book. But every night, Roxanne was sure to make herself plenty wide enough for a shy brown lucky dog and the old woman who named him. The reason why I thought I'd read you this book for the end of the year is because lots of times we get sad leaving our teachers and our friends, and we get a little discouraged about moving on to the next year because we think that we have lost something. But what I do want you to remember, just like in this book, you're lucky to have met your teachers and your friends in your class this year. And you are lucky to have learned so much. And you are lucky that you have lots of support from your friends and family. And I want you today to think about all the things you feel lucky for. Maybe getting through a math problem, learning how to read better, writing handwriting, or maybe even figuring out how to do something on the computer. And you're lucky to have met your teachers and your friends, and hopefully you'll feel inspired and ready to move on to the next year. Bye, boys and girls. Come back tomorrow, and I'll read you another book. Bye.